and welcome to Insights with me, Lynne O'Donnell. I'm joined today by Abid Humayun from Kabul. He's a development and peace-building practitioner who's worked in different capacities in the aid sector and been engaged actively in relevant national and international processes for the past 12 years. He talks about the effectiveness of the international aid that's poured into Afghanistan for decades, the agenda of the aid sector, and the impact that decades of war and now Taliban excesses are having on the mental health of the population. And it's devastating. Have a listen. Abid, thank you for your time today. You're currently the Executive Director of the 34-year-old Afghan charity Sanayi Development Organisation, as well as the elected chairperson of the agency coordinating body for Afghan relief and development. ACBAR is currently the only functioning body bringing together 203 national and international NGOs that are working in Afghanistan. Can you explain the nature of your work and what changes you've seen over the years, not just since the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan in 2021, but during the years of the Republic as well?
Thank you so much for having me, Lynn. Well, as part of our organization, for the last 34 years, we've been heavily and totally involved in 4 to 5 working areas, which are health, peace building and conflict transformation, community-driven development, and education. The 5th area, which has been always on and off for environmental reasons, is the humanitarian emergency.
Humanitarian, and what you dropped out for a second there, humanitarian and
emergency response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we've also been part of many national development processes, especially during the Republic era, from National Solidarity Program to Citizens Charter Program and National Health Program called Basic Package of Health Services, and so on. But as part of ACBAR, which is a network organization, we are trying to not only the 203 members, but also the broader NGOs community, which includes both national and international NGOs operating in Afghanistan. We try to resolve the challenges that we face collectively. We also, specifically in the last 3 years under the Taliban, try to figure out and navigate new approaches and ways to contextualize our operations in Afghanistan in spite of changes in the context.
Afghanistan, I'm sorry, go ahead, keep going. Yeah.
Just to the other part of your question, to answer that, I guess if you look at things at the surface level, nothing much has changed. To make it very simple and quick, an Afghan farmer 40 or 50 years ago had to do 100% of his farming manually, including and harvesting and everything. The reality on the ground today in Afghanistan is that unless I think that there's recently a lot of solar system integration into the irrigation mostly, but other than that, you wouldn't see a lot of machineries or technology or advancements in that area, and that goes for every other group of people in Afghanistan. Very result-oriented. If you look at the results, what has changed in the last not just 3 years of the Taliban, but the Republic, and even before that. Apparently, during the Republic specifically, we managed to promote some values across the country. The development work has been really, really big in terms of scale, and a lot of cultural changes happened. But the end state or the final results, especially if you consider the development index or other international standards, we are still considered as a least developed country for a reason.
Mm. Yes, well, that brings me to the next question, which is around Afghanistan having been a recipient of international aid in very large quantities for very many years, going back to the 1970s. Many billions of dollars worth of aid must have come into Afghanistan since then. Yet the country, as you says, remains amongst the poorest and least developed in the world. Where is all that money and largesse and well-intentioned activity gone?
I guess some chunks of that money is gone to Dubai and Turkey and some European countries, Swiss bank as well. But the resources which Afghanistan could use way better and could manage more effectively have been wasted, not just because of the widespread corruption in the country, but also the structures and processes of the aid itself had a role where it's really hard to find signs of billions of dollars when you travel to Afghanistan and roam around. It's you can barely see outcomes of all those billions of dollars spent, not just during the Republic, even before that. I think there was a huge amount of aid coming to Afghanistan, starting from the 70s, the 80s, and a couple of years early 90s. Afghanistan was receiving huge amount of funding. And when I said about the structure and processes within which the aid's been channeled to the country, one of the biggest problems there we had is that most of the aid was unconditional. Whether Afghans or old expats, I would say, they didn't feel accountable. And if you bring a lot of money to a society which has gone through decades of poverty and war and deprivement, and there's no accountability in place, I think it shouldn't be surprising that all that money is lost. And a lot has gone back to the countries of providing aid as well, which would, I think, make this answer too long. So I wouldn't go into details.
No, not at all, Abid. Your insights into the charity sector and where the money's gone and how it's been spent and why it's been wasted are incredibly useful. So, anything else that you have to say about it, especially, I mean, you remarked upon the corruption in the country. Money suddenly lands unconditionally. And of course, there is no sense of accountability for it, but also the conditionality of a lot of it was that a great percentage of it had to be spent in the country from which it came. And we know that the United States was certainly funding the Beltway, if you like. I mean, a lot of those companies and charities that came in were known euphemistically as Beltway bandits for a reason. So what is your view of how that worked and what the result has been, if any, not on the ground, as you say?
Well, I think again, it will have partly it's been because the aid was structured that way. To give you an example, from 20 to 30% of any grant or a project, so to speak, never made its way to Afghanistan. Never ever. Why? Because that was considered as operations and administration and HQ costs. Well, the lead and creator of this culture is, of course, the UN agencies, but then international NGOs followed the same thing. So, of the aid money, a certain percentage never makes its way inside the country. It goes to the banks of their headquarters in New York, in Geneva, and London. The other part of the problem was the group, which turned out to be the elite group during the Republic. Some of them were involved in aid sector, especially the entire 80s. I think these people, like those responsible in a larger sense, there was no sense of responsibility against their obligations for the people of Afghanistan. They lacked vision, they lacked competencies that it will take to manage aid and fundings more effectively. And I think they didn't care, because that's what we saw at the end of the Republic. And it was more individual driven agendas and ambitions rather than organizations or even country-wise agendas. So the issue, like as I said, there are two parts to it. Partly because of the structure of the aid, the way aid is structured, and the second part is because those Afghans involved in aid management happen to lack any vision, to lack competencies and the capacity.
The Republic was infamously corrupt and wasteful and self-serving. Was it any more or less so than the administrations that preceded it, especially given the problems that began for Afghanistan in the late 70s and 80s?
Yeah, I think the Republic, as it's mostly seen and widely seen as a new era, a new political or socio-political chapter, rather, in Afghanistan, that's far from reality. Republic was the continuation of the chaos and miseries and war and violence that began in 70s in Afghanistan. If anybody would like to argue, I think the easiest thing is have a look at the lists of the cabinet members and those in power and the parliament members in 20 years. And I would be happy to see some people who you would find without any ties to the issues of fundamentalism and extremism agendas that began in the 70s in Afghanistan. So that was the Republic. Republic wasn't a new era because it was all the old people who were always thinking the only way out for Afghanistan is war and war and more war. They made the Republic. And anyway, so that's one thing. Like, let's do not mix up things and do not separate Republic from its past or Afghanistan's past. In terms of corruption, I think because the amount of aid was during the Republic, so that it would automatically decrease the corruption as well to such a level. But other than corruption, I think everything else was the same. The Republic, unfortunately, just continued what it received or inherited from its previous regimes in power. And also, I think it's differentiate between Republic and today, and between Republic and the previous regimes. The big reason is because there is an order. If you follow the main themes and challenges which started in Afghanistan in 70s, so there's an order, and you see that Republic happened exactly when it should have happened. But it was a big fail, a giant failure, and it wasn't more. The corruption was big because I would say first the amount of money coming into Afghanistan was unmatched.
Astronomical.
I wouldn't say, yeah, not even in Afghanistan, but in many countries in the world, that was unmatched. And the leaders, so-called leaders of during the Republic and before that, when they say lead by example, that's what they exactly did. As corrupt and incompetent politicians, you call them. So they really led by example in corruption. And that's how it trickled down to the lowest level of the society. Yeah. Everyone across the country thought, well, you do whatever you want to do, and the best part is you can get away with it, so why not?
That top-down culture, I remember there were surveys, public opinion surveys done in the early part of this century, let's say in the mid-2000s, and the corruption was found to be at every level of society because it trickled down. Even people trying to pay their electricity bills had to bribe the person taking their money to pay their electricity to keep their electricity on. It was really quite astounding. And it was something that I wasn't used to, but as you're saying, it was a continuation. They were just better at making corruption really almost like a cultural issue, which is a very cruel way of thinking about it. What is the cultural context for what you see happening? You referred a little bit earlier to a comparison between the Republic and the Taliban, and it being just a continuation of pretty much the same. But what changes to the landscape have you noticed in the 3 years since the Taliban returned to running the country? It's widely believed and reported by some of us that aid is pilfered and redistributed to Taliban supporters, to the grave detriment largely of non-Pashtuns, and of course the situation for half the population, the women, is dire indeed. And there was, when I first started reporting this, and you will know, there was a huge pushback by the UN agencies, by WFP, even in DC, WFP executives were trying to brand me as a liar and undercut the quality and content of the reporting. I think it's now pretty well accepted that that was what was happening. But how would you describe the changes to the landscape in the 3 years with the Taliban?
Yeah, well, let me begin with women, I guess. I would see it from a very different angle, a little bit different than what's commonly streamlined the discourses. For that, what we need to understand is the roots of the current authorities, the Taliban. They come from the majority of the rural population, mostly deprived economically, and unfortunately very vulnerable to the social processes and ideologies, political ideologies. But anyhow, if not fully, to a great extent represent the rural society of Afghanistan.
Mm.
So when the bans or a lot of the recent developments on women's rights during the current government, they're all reflection of the perspectives and opinions of the rural population inside the country. Why it hasn't changed? Around 2 decades of communism, around 2 decades of democracy, and in between, of course, fundamentalism and Islamism. Why nothing changed is another question. Why is it the same still after? Because it was the same in 50s and 60s and 70s. So the question is why it's the same in 2024.
Mm.
That will also refer to part of the question about receiving billions of aid and then what changed. And currently, there's no doubt that the situation in Afghanistan is really, I wouldn't say worst, or maybe it is, but in the contemporary history, I can say it's the worst ever. Of course, not including the previous Taliban era, because it was almost the same. But still, in that time, they didn't have like 100% control in the 90s.
Or the technology that they use very well.
Yes.
Mm.
So from education to work, these developments are they're not just if anyone is thinking that these are only pressurizing women, only making life hard for women, I think that's a great mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It is these bans and regulations and laws, they are putting the entire society at risk. at risk of being stuck forever, at risk of even moving backward, at being left behind from not just the world, but especially from the countries in the region, and so many more. So this is one thing I think I would like to clarify, that from wherever these policies would come, if this is the thinking, they need to rethink about it. It's not making the life hard for women only. Of course, it's affecting women the most, but in a not too distant future, we will begin implications on Afghanistan as a society and as a country. But in the cities, big cities where the most of the urban population of Afghanistan live, I think they're still trying to stand the ground in different ways. Women are trying to find ways out of this situation. But I'm not sure. So that's the, I think, greatest change, which is mostly about women. Interesting part is that other than very minor changes in the structure, the government structure, I mean, nothing much has changed. The structure is somehow the same. The services, not so much. The governance, not so much, I would say. Can I drink some water?
Please do.
Thank you. So, yeah. The structure is somehow the same, governance structure, but in terms of governance, not really. A lot has changed. As you know, the national budget and everything is absolutely different than Republic now. Even allocation of resources are done very differently. And revenues, national revenues is another thing, because even in the Republic, we were highly dependent on international aid. Not a lot of our domestic or national revenue was contributing to the national budget. So those, of course, are the changes. And adding one positive change is in terms of security and safety. Yes, it is nowadays. In last 3 years, it's been better than the last years of the Republic, of course. But on aid diversion, that's very complicated. As someone working in the aid sector for 12, 13 years, all the discussions around aid diversion, I think there's still a lot of clarification needed. And especially when it comes to applying the definitions we have of aid diversion across the different eras is very important. And excuse me. For example, if the Taliban it's just for the sake of example. The Taliban has an NGO, or an NGO has very close ties with Taliban officials. They're receiving funds and then somehow providing aid, not just monetary, but also when it comes to distribution and beneficiary selection and even locations selection. So if everybody across the board agrees that this is a diversion, then wouldn't it make sense to see how much of this aid diversion was happening during the Republic and during the Islamic government of 90s and before that? The big problem with aid diversion is this, that first, there are too many understandings of aid diversion. What is aid diversion and what is not aid diversion? But if we talk about the direct, the Taliban benefiting directly from aid, I think it wouldn't be, it would be very difficult to back it up with evidence. And also, like, is the cousin of a Taliban official considered Taliban? You know, it's very complicated, to be honest.
Yeah.
And a lot of clarification is needed so that not to a conclusion whether or not the Taliban benefit directly from humanitarian aid, because the one big debate that was going on last year, it was about the taxes that NGOs and everybody, like the entire aid sector, pays to the government, to the fact authorities, right? From the salaries, from suppliers, from procurements and everything, all those taxes. I guess that makes a lot of money. That makes a huge amount of money. Considered a diversion, or is it not? And this confusion is around. And I think sometimes I feel that a diversion, like many other kind of campaigns that we had in Afghanistan, human rights and gender equality. So I think this is a new terminology, a diversion, besides localization, which is another romanticized terminology now in the NGO sector. So if we're really serious about it, I guess we need to come up with common understanding and categories of aid diversion and definitions of it and its components, so everybody would understand what is it and even how to avoid and how to prevent it. Currently, I think because the clarification is not there, I guess even if it's the aid is diverted directly to Taliban, to clear the lines, to draw clear lines. Yeah, and other than that, I guess it's a very normal practice when you're in power in countries like Afghanistan, and you have control. So, if I mean, do I say that there is zero? Of course not. But how much is very difficult to answer.
I guess a lot of questions are very difficult to answer because cogent and verifiable information is also very difficult to come by, even more so, I would argue, under the Taliban than under the Republic, when there was at least an awareness of the concept of accountability, which doesn't exist anymore. I wonder, from the perspective of peace building, as you're also an expert in that area, are the Taliban repeating the mistakes of the recent past? I mean, they were sidelined in 2001 after the US invasion to end their regime in the post 9/11 weeks and months, and now they appear to be doing much of the same as they had done before. There's no inclusivity, for instance, and their actions are based on ideology. They do seem to have learned very well how to placate, if you like, the international NGO sector and those governments that really don't want the trouble of dealing with Afghanistan. And they've picked up on the issue of women as being emotive for Western governments and NGOs. That seems to me to be a big difference, but they still push back on any demands and they still get their way. The last meeting in Doha was a good example of that. We're not coming if there's any women. Oh, okay. So the international community that my taxes pay for as the UN decided that we would do what the Taliban wanted to do. Uh, so, you know, from your perspective as a peace building expert, are those, you know, how can the playing field, if you like, be leveled?
Well, the shortest answer I can give is a yes.
That it
They
can be
are
leveled?
no to the first part of the question, that they are repeating the
Repeating
mistakes
the
of
right, excuse me. Yeah.
yes. Again, you rightly mentioned about Taliban themselves being excluded from the processes while the republic was about to be born in Afghanistan. And now they're back to power and they're doing the same exactly. But in 20 years of the republic, when Taliban were excluded, everyone else was there. This is a big difference between two mistakes, two same mistakes, but also very different. It may be Hizb Islami. They joined to like later in the process, 2016, I believe. Taliban didn't, and they took the power again. But the difference is that from 2001 to 2021, yes, Taliban were excluded, but every other social and political group was included. But now it's the other way around. The Taliban took power, but they have excluded everyone, all the other social and political groups, which makes the mistake, in my opinion, greater. Because if exclusion of one group could cost a regime collapse in 20 years, now think of excluding all the groups and its cost for any government. I think this is very simple, right? Not a brain surgery. I think it's very clear.
Yeah.
The other mistakes of previous governments they're repeating, and mostly trying to consider from the peace building point of view, is creating divisions or gaps among the social groups. What does that mean? If you provide employment opportunity or I don't know, education opportunities, health services, any other opportunities based on affiliation of the citizens to the Taliban or other groups. Like if that's the basis, this is directly gonna create gaps and distance between social groups,
Mm.
and a huge division. Is it easy? Is it sustainable to govern a divided society? From very little I know, it's never easy. It's very, very risky, and it's in no way sustainable. But this is the same mistake the previous governments were doing, and that they were making, because from the very beginning days of the political changes in the country after we tried to become a republic in the 70s, these mistakes are recurring. I think nobody is interested to learn. We saw a lot of governments so much powerful, very forceful, including the first republic, the first gosh, what's the word? Living 3 years in Islamic Emirate. I just forgot the term president. Sorry.
It's all right.
So, from the first ever president we had in Afghanistan in the early 70s, these mistakes are recurring. And bringing into play the ethnic lines and ethnic groups, and then capitalizing on traditional politics of the country, are all the repetitive and same mistakes that's been going on for 51.
And so you say it's unsustainable. The days are numbered, but we just don't know what that number is or what will follow. And so that brings me to the putative opposition groups, which you must be observing to some degree, even from Kabul. They don't seem really yet to have coalesced, let alone come up with anything to offer when it comes to reconstituting Afghanistan in any way at all. What are the obstacles? Do you take notice of it from inside the country, or do you feel that there's two parts to this question? What are the obstacles that they face, do you think? And are they so concerned with a blame game that deflects blame for the collapse from them, that they're incapable of coming up with anything that actually appeals to people inside the country?
Yeah, well, before responding to both parts of your question, I'm being brutally honest here. I'm wondering what makes them opposition. Like, what do they oppose is the question. What makes them the opposition? What is different in their policies and politics than the Taliban? When Taliban were sidelined and excluded, they tried to revive the fighting fronts, raise funding for waging war, train more fighters. It's very difficult to see the difference, and therefore calling them even opposition groups. If it's about the policies and priorities on human rights and women's rights, I will be happy to show the thousands of women's rights violations in their own villages. I'm not going to take them hold them accountable for the entire country or for their entire province, in their own villages. So that's a rhetoric, I think. They're not even close to believing in gender equality or democracy, even, or human rights, or nothing.
Yeah.
And that's why I wonder how can they even claim to be the opposition? And the last point is that, well, Now you are, and you're the same the Taliban did in 2001, 2, 3. Other than the fact that they were more effective and more efficient, because they regrouped and reorganized everything very quickly, and they were just one group, and they succeeded to fail like 20, 25 groups who always used to claim the ownership of the country and the leadership of it.
Yeah.
So let's have this balance, or rather imbalance, in mind when we talk about opposition groups. But more tragic is that all they've got is offering more war. And I wonder what is the obsession with war and violence. At least they had the opportunity of living in a democratic country for 21 years. At least they had the exposure and experience. And if they come back and say, well, the solution to an Afghan problem is more war, then I will highly doubt their competence or their abilities to even claim the. Now, about the obstacles, some part of what I've been saying can be the obstacles to them, of course, because they have nothing different, they have nothing new, and they lost the support of people in 21 years of negligence and corruption and incompetence and family-driven politics and businesses. So I guess even if suppose they get to an agreement with the Taliban tomorrow, they're not going to get the communities back. They're not going to get the people back or their support the way they abandoned the same people and communities and ran away with their armored cars turned on, like switched on. What do you say? With their armored cars on.
Yeah. Yeah.
and stars on their shoulders, and running away and abandoning and leaving behind everyone. And I hope they realize that. And those are the biggest obstacles for them. They have nothing new to offer. They've never been useful to really help the country lay the foundations for the development and prosperity and peace and stability. They never were part of the solution. They always gifted deaths and dead bodies to their own people for decades, not just during the Civil War, not to mention before that. And even in terms of how far would they place themselves from the Taliban? Because that's the biggest thing they criticize about the Taliban. But weren't it the same people who killed, like, I don't know, maybe over 2 million of Afghan citizens to establish Islamic government? Well, if Islamic government and Islamic Emirate, if it's just that, then I don't think it's changeable, right?
Harsh words spoken. Yeah. Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying. All change, no change. And those, I mean, what you're saying are very harsh words spoken with very gentle voice. And even though there are some people who are deep thinkers involved in what they call and like to call themselves and portray themselves as the anti-Taliban opposition, there's an awful lot of jaw. There is a lot of people who do want to go back to war, and there's an awful lot of people who are just getting involved because they want it back. They want their money back, their position back, their power back. So I hear what you're saying. It's that too is unsustainable. Yeah. But I'm also interested a bit in hearing what you have to say about the impact of this, half a century of war and death for Afghan people, only to see it evaporate. What's the impact on the people been? That's an awful lot of trauma to absorb. Are you seeing in the jobs that you do? Are you seeing the impact of that on people at a personal level?
Well, I guess you don't need any mental health expert to tell you that, because now it's that obvious and apparent, not just in people's behavior, but even in their faces. From the anger issues to depression and losing hope and ambitions, you would find all kinds and types of mental health disorders across the country. Of course, among women and girls nowadays. But the entire population is traumatized. You would hardly find an Afghan family who has not lost a family member to the half a century of violence and war and killings going on in the country. And that's affecting their decisions. That's affecting the choices they make. That's affecting the growth of Afghanistan as a country, because if you are struggling with your very basic human being, food and a shelter and some decent clothes, what else would you be able to think about ever? And this society is trapped into that situation for 51 years now. So it's no wonder that education is not important. It's no wonder that nobody's talking about gender equality anymore. Nobody's concerned about human rights situation, because when 90% or even more of a population lives below the poverty line, how is it possible to be sane and still expect the society to contribute to other social phenomena and other social development processes? Because, what does it mean to be on the poverty line? And one of the more prominent effects of this long-standing war and violence in Afghanistan is that human have become so meaningless.
Human life has become so meaningless.
Yeah, because if you have seen people getting killed in thousands and hundreds of thousands for like 50 years, it devalues the human life. And that's why even I think today people in Afghanistan have developed resilience against a lot of such issues. They're like, this is life, and the human life doesn't mean nothing. And then it has terrible impact on our behavior as a society. And we can fall for traps. We can fall for, I don't know, for very less material compensation. We can do a lot of things that a proper civilized, educated, and healthy society would never even think about. These are all the impacts of these 40, more than 40, 50 years of war and violence and killings and bloodshed and hatred, which was injected from the very early 80s by different political and jihadi groups among the society. They damaged and destroyed the social fabric for their own, back then, political agendas, for their political groups' political agendas, but during it was all about their own personal, maximum family related agendas and priorities.
Is it possible, in your view, for Afghanistan to overcome the trauma that you're talking about, over more than 50 years of it, and for the people of the country to rebuild Afghanistan on their own terms without outside interference, whether it's from the UN and all its agencies, or Western governments, or regional neighbouring governments, or even the putative anti-Taliban opposition? And those who clearly and desperately want to return to war for their own self-validation. What's your view, Abid? Is it possible?
It is. And we're very lucky that if we begin to pursue that route, we don't have to do a lot of things for the first time. We have the whole lot of experiences that we can use from the best practices, the international standards, things that have worked and things that have not worked. So I guess in that regard, we're very lucky that it's all it takes is intention and determination to do that. I believe it's a really rich country, not because of the minerals and all the natural resources that I hope remain untapped, but also in terms of the potential economic opportunities we can not only create for Afghanistan, but for the region.
Yeah.
All we need is the stability and security to enable us to go to that development route. Honestly speaking, we lost everything when we thought staying neutral and impartial is not the right foreign policy for Afghanistan. And that's exactly 1973, when we attempted to have our first republic and our first ever president. And this centuries-long traditional government type, the get rid of the king and the prime minister of those days. So, the point I want to make is that everything began to collapse in Afghanistan from the day that we decided to no longer stay neutral in the region, not just in the regional politics, but also in international politics. So perhaps that's not our thing. Perhaps we need less involvement of regional and international actors in Afghanistan matters, because that's the historical fact. And we need to invest a lot on the people. What makes me really feel sad sometimes is that the Afghan population are among very unique population and citizens that they get hit inside, disrespect, and limited opportunities, judgments, and you name it, and they get the same abroad. I guess after 50 years, perhaps it's the time for the people to feel how dignity and respect feels like, and how living and how living in your own country and with your own people feels like, in harmony, of course, and the economic growth and development and prosperity. And the reason I just said that we need to come up with a new solution for Afghanistan other than war, because war we tried for 51 years. We gave millions of lives and we caused millions to immigrate and leave the country. So that's why I don't understand this insist and emphasize on more war.
Yeah.
It can be any other thing than more violence and fighting and killing. But what that could be is perhaps creating this sense of ownership and belonging to the Afghan people. And I think exclusion or suppressing one another has to stop, because that's clearly another thing that's not worked in 5 decades. I mean, I just heard somewhere somebody asked that, yeah, I remember where, so I'm not going to name it. It was an interview. And the guy was asked that, suppose you overthrow Taliban and you create your own, establish your own government tomorrow in Afghanistan, where do you think the Taliban will go? Which is a very, I mean, reasonable question to ask.
Yeah.
They're going to come back. You can't just omit part of this country or a part of the population of this country because just only you disagree or you don't like him or any other reason. I think all the positive forces should come together, and the ideal situation would be to allow a totally new group of mostly young generation with no ties. I mean, because 90% of the Afghan population have been the victims throughout. They've been the victims at many levels. So maybe give him a chance, give the 90% a chance to take the leadership of the country and to try to find ways other than war and violence and killings and bloodshedding, and position the country where it deserves, and the people of Afghanistan as well. It is very much possible, but we're nowhere close to that, because I don't see any signs of moving toward that direction currently. I mean, we are lagging so much behind that we still need to lay foundations. I mean, it's going to take us another maybe couple of decades just to lay the foundations for the future, for a brighter future of the country. So, and it's not just all about buildings and roads and construction, but also about developing the people and communities and empowering them.
Yeah.
So I think that's the solution. And if we could, anytime, I mean, it doesn't matter, but for the sake of justice, bring those responsible for 50 years of chaos and killings and loss of millions of lives into account, or to justice. I guess that will be the beginning of a new era and a new chapter for Afghanistan, not the eras forcefully thrown at us by other people.
Well, let's end there. Abid, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for your time. The line has held up, even though you're in Kabul. It's a teeny bit wobbly, but everything came through loud and clear. And it's been my honour to have you on the podcast. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Lynne.
That was Abid Humayun, development and peace building expert, talking to us from his office in Kabul. He talked about the continuum of corruption, poor governance, abuse, war, and death, which for 50 years has blighted Afghanistan. He talked heartbreakingly about the personal impact of this trauma on Afghanistan's people and about his belief that Afghans can rebuild their own country if left to their own devices. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. That's all for now. I'm Lynne O'Donnell. Bye-bye.